Welcome to Childcare Rockstar Radio. I am your host, Kris Murray. Childcare leaders around the globe are breaking through challenges, leading the way in innovation, testing new best practices, and impacting children and families in a much more powerful and positive way than ever before. Each week, join me for interviews with early childhood leaders and experts that will leave you inspired to become the next childcare rockstar. Now, let's go. This is episode 83 of Childcare Rockstar Radio, featuring Alyssa Campbell. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. And I want to welcome you in. Come on in and join me for an incredible episode. It's all about emotional intelligence today, here on the podcast with me, your host, Kris Murray. And Alyssa Campbell is the founder of an organization called Seed and Sow, sew.org. She is the host of her own podcast, and she's an amazing young lady. She's expecting with her first baby, and she's a Vermonter. And she created a series of trainings and a whole kind of process around emotional intelligence for early childhood educators, leaders, children, families, and parents. We talk today in the podcast, we dive right into her 5-step process for how to peel back your layers and dig into really what triggers you, what your biases are, and how you grew up. It's an amazing thing here on this episode of Childcare Rockstar Radio. And Alyssa, let me just tell you a little bit more about her. She says that emotional intelligence saved her life. She says, I went from living with anxiety, turning to coping mechanisms to get by, and feeling impatient with and exhausted by the tiny humans every day, to building a toolbox for processing hard emotions and experiences. I learned how to navigate life in a way that didn't leave me drained and snippy by the end of the day. So in today's crazy world, crazy season, the pandemic continues on here in the United States and globally, and we are into September, and you might be feeling just a little bit drained and snippy. And if so, you're going to really get a lot out of this podcast. I want to thank our friends over at Honest Buck Accounting for sponsoring Childcare Rockstar Radio. They are one of our top partners, and we are thrilled to be working with them at honestbuckaccounting.com. And you can learn more about their services. They provide a full range of bookkeeping and accounting services so you can focus on the early ed and or other parts of the business that really light you up and not have to worry about the bookkeeping, the finances, the accounting, and the tax preparation. How's that sound? So check them out at honestbuckaccounting.com, and you can learn more about a $1,000 scholarship that they have towards a Lucky Child Care Center owner and program at honestbuckaccounting.com/Kris Murray. What am I doing over here? I am in my beautiful office space here in Carbondale, Colorado. You might have heard me talk about it on prior episodes. I recently was able to secure a gorgeous office space. We call it a mastermind studio of sorts. We are doing video production, audio production, podcasting, masterminding, VIP days with clients. I just did one yesterday. Shout out to Judy Bradby, winner of our Childcare Rockstar 2019. And she got to come and be with us for the day. And then I took her out to dinner last night. And we literally worked on her business all day yesterday here in the office. And it was really fun, went really fast, but we did come out with an action plan for her, a very specific point by point, step by step, in priority, what she needs to go do to build the business of her dreams. And if that sounds like something you're interested in, I would like you to do two things. I would like you to go to childcaresuccesssummit.com. And if you have not purchased your tickets yet for our virtual summit event, October 14th to the 16th, featuring none other than Mr. Simon Sinek as a keynote speaker, as well as Mr. Trent Shelton, two of the top speakers I've ever seen in my whole life, and people that I follow with vigor and excitement and enthusiasm because they're just amazing humans, as well as other speakers inside and outside the industry, as well as my coaches and myself leading the entire 3-day event. It's going to be an amazing and incredible time, and you can enjoy it from your couch. So why the heck not? What are you waiting for? Go over right now to childcaresuccesssummit.com and claim your tickets at this early low price of $197. And after September 30th, which is just a handful of days from now, depending on when you're listening to this podcast, those tickets will go up by $100. So you got to get in by September 30th to get the best deal. All right. And there's a bunch of bonuses with that ticket as well. So go to childcaresuccesssummit.com to learn more and get your ticket now. Don't wait. Just go. Let's get it going. Get it done. That's the first thing. The second thing is, if you'd like to work with me one-on-one or with myself inside of our mentoring and coaching program, the Child Care Success Academy, a network unlike any other on the planet with 230 roughly childcare organizations, companies, and nearly 1,000 leaders, run, don't walk to childcaresuccess.com and click on book a coaching call at the top of the page. Book a coaching call, and you will have a strategy session coaching call with one of my certified coaches, most likely Coach Brian Dupre. If you're lucky, you can get on his calendar, and he's only got limited availability right now because his calendar is quite full. So do not delay on this as well, folks. Childcaresuccess.com, click on book a coaching call. It's free. He's the author of Childcare Millionaire, and he's going to rock your world in terms of your business reinvention and success and thriving and not just surviving. So all of that and more to be had for you right here. All the resources that we offer the amazing early learning industry. So without any further ado, let's dive right in to episode 83 featuring Alyssa Campbell. Enjoy. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. I am excited to bring you a great guest today. Her name is Alyssa Campbell. Alyssa, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Thanks for having me. I'm doing pretty well. Yeah, how are you?
Doing great. Hanging in there and helping folks with this whole crazy back to school season that we're in.
Yeah, what a wild world.
It is a wild world indeed. Where are you right now? Where are you located?
Yeah, I'm in my living room in Vermont, in Burlington, Winooski, Vermont, right next to Burlington.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
My little sister is in Burlington.
Oh, nice.
So
my husband's from the area, so we moved here a couple of years ago.
Great. Tell us more about the work you do, Alyssa, and why it's important for our audience to learn about what you do.
Totally. I work in emotional development. My master's is in early childhood, and I've had like a number of jobs within early ed, as I feel like most of us in early ed do, where I moved from teaching preschool, and I've taught infants and toddlers. I was a director of a center. I was a nanny for a bit. So I've worn all these different hats in early ed. And the last school that I was working at was this like deliciously resource-rich school. And every head teacher had to have a master's in early ed. And we had these like just beautiful ratios and supports, like what I always yearned for as a teacher. And in that school, we were able to do research. We were partnered with a university. And so a colleague and I co-created the collaborative emotion processing method. We call it the CEP method, CEP for short. And it's designed as like a guide for building emotional intelligence. We researched it across the US and are writing a book on it now. And so a lot of the work that I do through SEED is around the STEP method. It's around building emotional intelligence and really bringing like parents into this journey with teachers. The STEP method has 5 components, And 4 are about us as adults, and 1's about our interactions with the kids. And what we really realized is how vital our work, our personal work in this is, and that so many of us didn't grow up with this. And so our patterns and reactions and habits and social programming and narratives are all ingrained. It's a part of our subconscious. And so doing this work on our biases and our self-awareness, taking care of our nervous system, learning how to co-regulate with kids and bring that calm, then allows us to do the adult-child interaction work of being a regulated caregiver who can show up with intention. And we walk through, now how do you respond to the kiddos? But we just found ourselves, my colleague Lauren Stablo and I, in these classrooms. She was in preschool at the time and I was an infant toddler. And we had a social emotional curriculum, as most schools do at this point. And we were just like, cool, this sounds great in theory. Like if I didn't have 7 babies crying at the same time or 18 kids who were trying to get out the door. And so we really wanted to take a look at like, what does it actually look like in practice? And what are the game changers for us as adults that then lead to a change in our practice?
Okay, cool. You just gave us a ton of information there. So let's unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, let's do
Which is the most overused word right now, but unpack. But we're going to do just that.
I'll take it.
So we're going to dive in. I'm dying to ask you about the 5 components of the SET method. But before we get there, tell us a little bit about your professional and personal journey. You said you've been in early ed with all those different roles. So just expand that for us a little bit, if you would, like maybe a couple of career highlights, or what was your favorite part of some different experiences in early ed?
Totally. I kept like finding myself. I started in preschool. It was my first job ever. And I was in New York City at the time and loved it. And on my lunch break, I would go to the infant room and like spend time with babies. And then as time went on, years went on, I was in different classrooms and moved through different schools. I just found myself wanting to go younger and younger. I'd be like, oh, I wish I had this kid as a 2-year-old. And so I was working in toddlers and was like, oh, I really wish I had them as a baby. And I could have supported this development that literally went to the point of like, the only thing before this is in the womb, right? Like I'm going as young as we can go now. And so, I just like found myself in my hub right now, like my favorite age to work with is 12 to 24 months. Such a fun time for emotional development, for that language development and how those play together. But what I would say my ultimate like career highlight was getting to work alongside an OT, an occupational therapist, who is very much a part of our work at Seed now. She opened my eyes to the way the central nervous system plays into absolutely everything that we do, and how we're showing up with kids and how kids are able to show up in the world, what language they can access, what tools they can access at a given point, and how we can maintain regulation of the nervous system as well as like preventatively as well as from a reactionary standpoint. She just like opened my eyes to this. And I got to work with her at that last school that I taught at before leaving the classroom to run Seed full time. It was, we had, I said, a resource-rich school. We had an OT and an SLP, both contracted, who would come in and work with the teachers, not there for individual services with kids, but really to support us in building our toolbox. And Lori, it was incredible. It was so incredible. And now, like, she's a huge part. I brought her into Seed to serve teachers in the way that I felt so lucky to have had access to her.
That's awesome. So tell us a little bit more about Seed and Sow. That's your organization that you founded. And that's when you're talking about Seed, you're referring to Seed and Sow. So what is that organization like? What is your mission there? And tell us more about like how many team members you have or that kind of stuff.
Totally. So it started as just me, like solo, doing this work and being like, ooh, I want to have these conversations just kind of out loud and in a public space. And so for the first year, it was just like community building and having these conversations. And then we started to develop some products and services. And I was doing a lot of in-person workshops and trainings for teachers and things like that. But at this point, Seed is, for me, it's the like village mentality. Like if we look at like traditional village in Africa, like everybody was working together. And we have in the last few decades moved away from the village as we knew it. And now you pay for your village. You're paying for childcare. You're paying for services. And of course, teachers should get paid. Like as an early childhood educator, I'm like, yes, please. And it has shifted the way that we're raising our tiny humans. And we know that in early ed, our teachers are often not just underpaid, but under-resourced. That it was a dream for me to have access to that OT and that SLP versus when we look at like elementary ed, you have a school psychologist, you have a school nurse, you're going to have an OT and an SLP in-house. You have all these other support services so that the teachers can do what's in their zone of genius, what's in their wheelhouse. Mm-hmm. And so for SEED, what I really wanted to do was bring these support services into the lives of teachers and available as resources for them to access, as well as parents, so that we can all have this conversation on how to raise emotionally intelligent humans. What does this look like to really move that needle? And access to those humans and access to resources is such a huge part. Mm-hmm. So we have a couple different avenues for that. I have a podcast where I interview different experts in the field of early ed. We bring parents on. Sometimes it's a solo show if it's in my wheelhouse. And so that's totally free. We have a whole bunch of free tools for teachers and parents as well. And then we have some paid programming where we have what we call our Tiny Humans, Big Emotions program. That's for parents, essentially a guide to how to do this work within the home. Mm-hmm. We have a reparenting class, how to do this work ourselves, how to dive into our social programming and our biases, reparenting our adult self. And we are launching the SEED certification at the end of September, which is 8 workshops, 7 hours of professional development for teachers, and then access to our team in an ongoing fashion to implement what's learned from the workshops. And it's 5 different experts in the field of early ed, really bringing these resources into the classroom in the way that, like, I guess I always wanted as a teacher, where instead of like going to a conference and going to a workshop and I leave and I'm fired up and I'm ready to go, and then I get back and you fall into your old patterns and you're like, wait, what was that thing? And so these are all pre-recorded so that teachers can revisit them, and then they get access to our team. There's a community platform they can ask questions, and as long as a school is SEED certified, they get access. And then all the parents of those kids get access to Tiny Humans, Big Emotions, again, bridging that gap so that we're all working together on that.
Awesome. That's super cool. I was going to ask you a question about the SEED platforms, and I just lost it. I'll come back. Tell us a little bit about your home and personal life. Totally.
So I'm married to my husband. He's right back here in this work from home life. Everybody's here. Gang's all here. And yeah, he's originally a Vermonter, which brought us back to Vermont. And I'm currently pregnant with our first kiddo.
Congrats.
Thank you. Hence the out of breath Alyssa. And yeah, I've grown our little family here in Vermont.
When are you due?
I'm due in March.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm 12
Good.
Weeks. Yeah.
What I was going to ask you is, what's the name of your podcast?
Voices of Your Village.
Awesome. Okay, guys. So Voices of Your Village, go check it out. And then we'll get more information about SEED and SO's website and such at the end. So tell us a little bit, Alyssa, about a fun fact. What is something about you that you can share that hardly anybody knows?
Yeah, you know what? You put this question out to me, and I was like, ooh, I even asked my family, because we have an Instagram that's really active, and I show up really, truly just as myself over there. It's really fun for me. And I'm pretty much an open book. And so I was like, what don't people know about me? It was really hard to come up with something, because truly I feel like if it exists, people know it, or it's not by accident, not on purpose that they don't. My cousin, I asked her, I was like, what's a fun fact no one knows about me? And she was like, that your favorite acronym is SCUBA. And I was like, okay, yeah, sure. But that, there's no weight to that. There's no merit. There's no reason, but it is my favorite acronym. I don't know. It's been really hard. I think something that's not commonly known is that I speak German as well. I studied abroad in Austria. And I've gone back and forth. I have gone back and forth a number of times. I would I studied abroad in high school, and then I'd come home and I'd work at the local restaurant. I'm from a really small town in Western New York, like farm town. And I'd work at the restaurant and save up and like buy a plane ticket and go back and come back and work at the restaurant, buy a plane ticket and go back. So that's like I would say home away from home, which is pretty wild.
Beautiful. Austria is gorgeous. Super, super cool. So our listeners are parents as well as business owners and leaders in early ed. They're impacting young children every day, either in their home life or definitely in their business life. So let's dive a little bit into, what do you really want them to take away from this podcast? What are some things that you're bringing to schools, and more so from a leadership perspective, that they can maybe plug into their schools from listening to this, or just give us maybe some highlights of what you really want to convey to our listeners?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to hold up a mirror first, to do our own work and to take a good hard look at like, what's triggering us at work? Maybe you're in administration and you have, I've been a director, like have that teacher that I'm like, oh man, like it's a challenging relationship, and figuring out like, what are those triggers? What's coming up for you as an individual in order to best show up as a leader? Or if you're a teacher in a classroom, same thing, like being able to do this work on our biases and building awareness of, when am I getting fired up? Like what is kind of making me tick here? And how can I notice it? Where is it starting to build when it's at maybe a 2, a 3, or a 4 in my body before I'm at like a 7, 8, or 9 and I'm ready to blow? And now our tiny humans are firing off this too, or maybe coworkers are firing off this as well. Really owning how we show up in the world.
I love that. Yeah, we recently put together a new course called Leadership Mastery for early educators. And we talk about showing up as a leader and how you show up every day in your school, when you walk into your school, and then throughout the day. So I love that, Alyssa, thinking about it as really bringing out the mirror, bringing out the hand mirror, and really checking in with ourselves about the triggers in difficult situations, difficult people, and challenging conversations, and having those tough conversations. So that's very, very powerful. Let's dive into the method that you created. Talk a little bit about those 5 components of. And what was it called again? The
SEP method.
SEP method.
CEP.
Talk a little bit more about that, if you would.
Totally. So number 1 is self-awareness. Like that's where I was saying, like, where am I at a 2, 3, or a 4 before I'm blowing at a 7, 8, or a 9 and exploding? Starting to really get to know what we're feeling in our body and kind of where we are. We think of it as maybe like a daily check-in in the morning, and then being able to kind of keep tabs on that throughout the day. Another is biases. This is where we're digging into our social programming, our narrative, what's coming up from our childhood, our cultural context, that's living in our subconscious and isn't necessarily consciously driving our behaviors, but is beneath the surface, almost like a record player. It's all been recorded and is driving us subconsciously. So getting to know those biases. Bias is often a word that makes people go, ooh, I don't have biases. And just the reality is that everybody does, right? Like we all grew up in different households where I'm one of 5 kids and I'm the only girl. And so there were a lot of gender specific narratives in my household that I grew up with. And so I had biases that I had to really dive into as an adult to figure out, like, what narratives am I bringing to adulthood that are affecting how I'm showing up in the world? I also am a sexual assault survivor, and that I found myself like in the classroom when rough and tumble play was happening. I was really triggered, and I had to figure out how to navigate that and do my own work. And so really starting to notice what's coming up for us that are our biases. So self-awareness, bias, scientific knowledge. This is the idea of mirror neurons, that when a baby laughs and it's just that most delicious feeling, and you laugh and you feel with oxytocin because they have oxytocin flowing and now you do, and it's so delicious.
Yeah.
If a kid is throwing a tantrum in the middle of your classroom, inside you're now throwing a tantrum. Like that is also going to mirror. And so this is the concept of owning that calm and learning how to self-regulate in order to co-regulate. And then it's never a child's job to get calm for us. It's our job to get calm for a child. But it takes a skill set and a toolbox to pull from in order to do that. The fourth is self-care. Again, like super buzzwordy, but for us, this means like, are you drinking enough water? As a teacher, are you getting out of the classroom to eat food or to go to the bathroom when you have to? Are you setting boundaries with families or with the kids or with your coworkers or whatever? That taking care of yourself every day. And so those are the four that are about us. And essentially, we can't do number 5, which is adult-child interactions, where we guide folks through, okay, now this kid's throwing the tantrum, like how do we respond in the moment? We can't show up and do that if we aren't doing these other 4. If we're triggered, if we're dysregulated, if we're not taking care of ourselves, if we're not even aware of where we are in that scale of 1 to 10, we can't respond with intention to the tiny humans.
That's powerful. Are there ways for us to get in touch deeper with our biases? Do you have any exercises or tools or maybe resources on your website where we could go through a path of peeling back the layers to get more in touch with those biases?
Totally. So Harvard and Yale both have bias tests that are totally free that you can take. And it'll start to uncover like, ooh, wow, I didn't know that one for myself. And it's eye-opening. And there are some that I like went into and I was like, definitely don't have a bias here, and came out and was like, yikes, Alyssa, you have work to do. And so Harvard and Yale for the bias test, I would say start there. It's a great starting point. And then as you're diving deeper for teachers in particular with the Seed Cert, we have 2 workshops. We have the self-awareness and bias workshop, which is taught by a psychologist who does this work professionally. She's incredible, Dr. Lynetta Willis. And then we have anti-bias curriculum for anti-racist classrooms. How are we identifying our biases cross-culturally? And doing the work, what does that work look like for us as teachers so that we can show up with intention there? And that one's taught by Jasmine Price. She's a PhD student out of Ohio.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I love that framework. Those are very powerful components, and that's a really cool method. Thank you for taking us through it.
Totally.
So how can leaders of childcare centers use this method to better serve young children and their parents?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's kind of like a framework for living, right? Like for me, it's also like how I end up communicating with my parents or my in-laws or my partner or friends and tiny humans and coworkers, that as you start to do this work for yourself, then you are uncovering these biases. I'm noticing like, when my husband walks in and says something that's annoying and now I'm triggered, like, ooh, yikes, I'm triggered. And normally I would have just snapped back with something sassy. And now as I build this toolbox, I can be like, all right, Alyssa, I'm just going to go to the bathroom for a minute, pause, regulate so that I can respond with intention. And so honestly, like when we're using these tools, it's not just going to affect how you show up with the tiny humans or at work. It affects how you show up in relationship with others because it affects how you show up with yourself. Do you know if there would be a possibility of doing like parent workshops with these kind of tools? Like, are you working with Vermont schools and preschools to actually do workshops for parents, or do you do more like webinars? How do you actually reach out and touch a lot of parents with this valuable information? Totally. That's so sweet. So our Tiny Humans, Big Emotions and reparenting classes, reparenting is doing the work of the other 4 components, reparenting our adult selves, diving into the biases, building awareness, doing our own work. And then the Tiny Humans, Big Emotions work is combining that with now, how are we interacting with the tiny humans? What comes up for us around boundaries and punishments and certain behaviors? And how do we regulate in order to respond with intention? So those are our 2 big drivers for parents. We right now have a village of, there's about 30,000 people globally. And those are accessible around the world. And we are in the process of producing them also in Spanish. And all of our resources are going to be available in Spanish by the end of this year. And so those are already up and running. And then I was doing a lot of in-person workshops until we really moved those to online. Just found myself like only able to serve a certain number of folks when I was doing in-person workshops versus bringing those workshops online, opened it up to folks around the world. Mm-hmm. And then when schools sign up and become SEED certified, the parents of those schools get access to Tiny Humans, Big Emotions for free, so that parents are continuing to be on that same page with schools.
Mm-hmm. This is a funny question, but I was wondering personally if you've ever had the desire to be Dr. Campbell and get your PhD. Do you ever think that you might go down that road?
Oh my gosh, I get asked that a bunch. It was something that like a couple of years ago, I like tossed around. Like, do I want to do this? Honestly, right now, I love so much of what I'm doing. Like adding that doesn't make sense for me right now. I think part of it would be more of an ego, like could be Dr. Alyssa. And like that got to stay in check with. But yeah, no, I think like right now, what fills me up the most is collaborating with other experts in the field. Some who have their doctorate, every single person in the SEED cert has at least a master's, but I guess I don't feel the need to be the one with all the answers. And instead I'm like, let me learn from you. Like, let's bring you into this conversation and continue to serve in that way.
Right. So speaking of other collaborations and other work being done, what are some other organizations out there that we should know about that you either partner with or have done collab with that you feel are doing really good work?
Ooh, other organizations, I would say most of the time I'm collaborating with humans. Yeah. So like I said, Lori Goodrich is one of my favorites. And if you're in Massachusetts, especially if you're in the Boston area, she is a director of occupational therapy it's called OTA, the Kumar Center. They recently renamed, and I think that's the new name, OTA, the Kumar Center. And it's this delicious, I've been able to tour it. I've had kiddos who were a part of it, like sensory rich environment where OTs and SLPs, speech language pathologists, are working together to support the nervous system in order to build language development. And it's just their approach to sensory integration is incredible. So Lori has come and done parent education series through SEED, where it'll be like a 4-week series for parents of different age groups, really learning about like why it matters if your kid crawls in crawling position, or how to tell if your kid is sensory sensitive and how to support them. And for the love that like sensory is so much more than a sensory bin. Like that is one of my biggest pet peeves in early ed when we talk about sensory play and people are like, oh, stand. And I'm like, no, like spinning and going upside down and jumping and using all of your senses and integrating all of it. But so Lori is a huge resource for us. I work with OTs a lot. I'm really drawn to OTs because so much of this work is about the nervous system. I mentioned Dr. Lynetta Willis. She's a human that I'm like, at some point, I would love for you to just run SEED with me. She's so incredible. She does a lot of the self-awareness and bias work. If you are looking for a program, hers is a little higher end, like, and she does coaching and stuff too. She's a psychologist. She's incredible. Dr. Lynetta Willis. And yeah, those are like my 2 big partners at this point that we're working with. I'm trying to think if there's anybody. Latinx Parenting is another one for Latinx parents who are navigating like specifically the cultural shift that we see a lot in Latina communities.
Yep.
And moving, doing the reparenting work. And for any of us, like choosing to do something differently than is culturally relevant for us, it's hard. And there's going to be resistance both within you, but also within your culture and, grandparents and all that jazz. And they do a really good job over at Latinx Parenting, producing materials and workshops for Latinx folks in particular.
Awesome. Thank you. That's great. Those are great resources. So you are very young and you're expecting your first child. So you might not have a lot of, wish I could go back and do differently type things because you're still early in your career journey, I would say.
Yeah.
being in my 50s, and I think you might be 20 years younger than me. But anyway, but still in that, if you, knowing what you now know, if you could go back in time and do one thing differently, or maybe add in a different element to your journey, what would that be? What would that look like if you have one?
Yeah, I think there are two big ones for me. One, I would have started this personal work earlier, right? Like I kept looking at like the kids and the behaviors from the kids and how to support the kids. And it was a while until I was like, oh, yikes, it's you, Alyssa. The key is you. And so that's one thing I wish I would have gone back and like just started that journey earlier. Hopefully kids who are growing up with this work don't have to go back and start that, but that it's a part of what they grow up with and being able to do this work all along the journey. And the other one, kind of hand in hand there, would be doing anti-racism work personally. I think before I could, a huge part of doing anti-racism work is doing that bias and self-awareness and social programming work of learning about where I came from in my own cultural context, and then how that fits into the greater landscape. And so without doing that work myself, it just delayed a whole bunch of that journey for me.
Mm-hmm. With all of those components and tools and the work that you've described, what's coming up for me is I'm very hopeful and optimistic about the future, because I feel like the awareness that we have around our cultural feelings, how we were brought up, racism, all of these things, gender bias, are getting so much coverage and focus and new tools in our toolkit, and we're talking about it and we're having open conversations about it. And it's just so great. Like there's a lot of crazy, not great things in our world right now, but I love that our world is really having a renaissance, I think. First, it was the Me Too movement and more empowerment for women. And now we're having kind of with Black Lives Matter, a racial empowerment movement, and being part of that and seeing my kids be part of that. I have a 15-year-old daughter who's quite an activist. She marched in our local Black Lives Matter activist movement here. And I'm proud of that. I think it's really, really cool. So I think there's a lot to be optimistic of. And I was wondering if you might feel the same way.
Oh, absolutely. I feel like kids these days are like so much more rad than we were. And I think that's the goal, right? I was actually just having this conversation. I was visiting my parents this past weekend, and my cousin recently got married to a woman. She's also female. And my grandma was really struggling with this. I come from a Catholic family, and this was a challenge. And she was just kept saying, like, you just know how I feel about this. And so we're having this conversation, and it was hard for me. And it was cool to see the generational shift, from where my grandma was coming at it from, where my mom's approach and feelings and thoughts, and then mine. And there was just such a clear progression. I was like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to hear what our kids are saying. Like, you guys are so outdated. Like, here's how you should have progressed. And I think that that's really rad. And I don't think it's new to this generation. I think it's always happened. I think we've always pushed these barriers, but it is really cool that this generation's raison d'etre human rights, right? Especially for marginalized folks, and giving voice to folks and amplifying voices of folks who have never been heard or have always been silenced. And I think that's incredible. And I was just reading an article this morning, our local school district, a group of children had written a letter to the school board with 8 action items for the school board all around racial justice. And the school board had just approved them. And it was just this huge, really, and it involved looking at the curriculum, et cetera. And I was like, that's so rad, really cool that we are raising these activists and self-advocates who are saying no, I'm not going to accept this. That I know, at least when I was growing up, respect was this almost on a platform, and there was this fear of being disrespectful. And I'm glad that kids are pushing that envelope and saying no, not in the name of lives, of human lives.
Right. Absolutely. And not to paint the picture that everything's Pollyanna, because we do have a long way to go. So if you're a person of color watching these two white girls right now talk about this topic, hopefully you guys will take it in the spirit in which it's intended. But I do feel certainly in my lifetime, we've seen a lot of progress. So that just makes me super optimistic for our kids and for our future. Alyssa, what are you reading, watching, listening right now, or that you feel is important to share, or like foundational books that you want to share with the listeners that have just been super formative for you in your area of work?
Yeah, foundational books is a great question, because I feel like right now in pregnancy, every time I open a book to read, I fall asleep. So I saw that question. I was like, oh, that's funny. How long do you have to read a book? So some of my favorite books right now, Self-Reg by Dr. Schenker. Again, back to that, how do we regulate our nervous system? What does it look like when a kid's dysregulated? What's our role there? He's a neuroscientist, really nerdy and really awesome. Self-Reg. Mind in the Making by Ellen Galinsky, another fan favorite for me. Whole Brain Child, which is, I feel like, a classic at this point. And then on the awareness side and doing that work, adult children of emotionally immature parents, in terms of if you didn't grow up with emotional intelligence in the same way that we're moving toward today within your household, hand raised over here, that's a rad book for starting to do some of that work. I am currently listening to How to Be Anti-Racist, Ibram Kendi's book. Loving that so far, learning and growing there.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
I think those would be
great.
my shout outs.
Nice. I love it. So is there anything that you feel I should have asked you that I haven't, or anything that you kind of want to close with, any messages to the listeners, or put an exclamation point on something?
Yeah, well, I do like that you noted that, as two white women talking about race, I'm like, yeah, we're moving in a good direction. Obviously, we do have a long way to go, and
right?
Lots to do, lots of work to do, lots of work that's ours to do and to own.
Yes.
One thing that you didn't ask. Oh, no, one thing that I wanted to leave folks with in general.
Sure.
Especially teachers, man, teachers in early ed wear so many hats, and I feel like there's always this desire to prove that we are professionals in our field. Mm-hmm. We're not often seen that way or treated that way. And I think with this can come the desire for perfection and fear of making a mistake or messing up or not being perfect in general. And the reality is that we're always working towards progress and not perfection. And there's not a single human that's tuning in, or either of us, that has left a day and been like, I was perfect all day. I was perfect in responding to the kids. I was perfectly regulated. I showed up as a perfect ally. All day long, we're going to drop the ball. We're going to make mistakes. And I think being able to engage, in relationship, in rupture and repair, or even just giving ourselves grace of woof, I didn't eat lunch yet, and now I'm feeling cranky. Just a few weeks ago, we were with family, and I was with the kiddos. There were 3 kiddos, and I found myself annoyed that they were having emotions, and was like, ooh, yikes, they're allowed to do that, and they're humans. And then as I kind of poorly navigated emotion coaching, and then took a beat and was like, ooh, I haven't eaten yet. We fed them lunch, and I haven't paused to take care of myself. And then set a timer for them and was like, I'm going to eat. I'm not taking any questions while the timer's going. When the timer's off, I'm going to be back to take questions and support you. In that meantime, here are your choices, to give myself that break. But it took some stumbling to get to that break, And embracing the truly progress over perfection goal here.
That's a huge one. I have so many clients and listeners to this show that talk about wanting to be perfect, and they won't let any projects go out into the beautiful world until it's 100% perfect, which means nobody ever does get to see it. It's still on the shelf because it ain't perfect. And so one of my mantras is good is good enough, or if it's 80% good, release it. You can get the other 20% perfect later. Like, just get it out there, people.
Yeah.
So I'm really, really glad you said that. I actually have a magnet that a friend of mine just gave me. It's on my bedside table, and it says, life does not have to be perfect to be wonderful.
Yeah.
Also, life does not have to be perfect to be joyful and funny and, entertaining as all hell and just glorious and passionate. And so all those things can show up if you put perfection aside. So I love that you said that.
Yeah.
How can people find you? So we know you have, I'm sure, a very cool podcast. Restate the name of the podcast, if you would, and then give us your website or other ways that people can reach out and find you.
Totally. So the podcast is Voices of Your Village. And then our mothership website is seedandsow.org. And you can really access all of our parenting resources, all of our teacher information, the SEED certification stuff, all through there. And then, like I said, we have a pretty active Instagram. That's seed.and spelled out .so SEW. And we post pretty much daily over there. And I'm in stories a lot, just hanging out with folks. And in that link in my bio, we also just have more free things. Like right now, a back to school guide for teachers. I try to keep just supporting folks with some sort of free tool all throughout the year. And those can be accessed at the link in my bio and Instagram.
Awesome. And if you guys need more information on those links and the spelling and the resources that Alyssa gave us, you can check out the show notes that go along with this episode, which happens to be episode 83 of Childcare Rockstar Radio. Thank you so much, Alyssa Campbell, for taking the time to be with us today and give us more real good, meaty, ideas, concepts, to-dos, and steps for your method and for how we can be more resilient, how we can get in touch with our biases, how we can really I'll use that word one more time, unpack the layers that are really making us human, that make us respond and react to other humans, little humans and big humans. Sometimes a lot of our listeners are like, I'm fine with the ones under 3 feet. It's the ones over 3 feet that I tend to have more of the issues with. I don't know if you hear that.
Yeah. There's a whole different level of, I was going to say sass, but maybe communication that comes with the over 3 feet. Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for having me. I can get nerdy about early childhood all day.
Oh, it's okay. We're actually a pretty non-nerdy program. We really focus on the business side, but I think it's refreshing every now and again to dive down into, more educational theory and teaching components and emotional, social, and all of that good stuff, because there's so much work going on in that area. And so it's always fun to have a rich conversation about all different aspects of early education. So thanks again, and good luck with baby number 1.
Thank you. Thanks again for having me.
All right. Take care. And thanks everybody for tuning in to Childcare Rockstar Radio, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.